Hey, it's Tracy here, and today I have a video to show you how I made this adorable Monster Hugs Halloween card. I started out stamping my monster from the Monster Stamp and Die set with Versamark ink onto some Bristol Smooth cardstock. I usually double stamp the Versamark ink to make sure I get a good impression on my paper before adding any embossing powder. Having the image set up in my MISTI makes sure it's perfectly aligned before the second stamping. The image was embossed with white embossing powder, and once it was heat set, back into the MISTI so that I could add his two wonky eyes. Once I had them in the position I wanted, I stamped them with VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and then I added clear embossing powder to them before heat setting once again. Once the embossing was all done, it was time to make the image pop with some ink blending. For sponging on camera, I'm using a sheet of white copy paper under the image. I sponged Mowed Lawn Distress Oxide ink all over the monster and then used paper towel to wipe the image and expose the white embossed lines underneath. The monster was cut using dies from the same set that cuts both the body and the face in two pieces. Once I popped them out of the die, I set the pieces aside so that I could work on my background panel. Once again, I'm using Bristol Smooth cardstock. Whenever I'm using Distress Oxide inks, I use Bristol Smooth because the blending is so easy and the paper doesn't seem to keep catching the blender. I sponge the panel with Blueprint Sketch, Seedless Preserves, and Wilted Violet Distress Oxide ink. When I create a blended panel with these inks, I find that I have to be patient and keep working the colors in back and forth until I see them start blending together rather than one color laying over top of the other. I'm not sure there's any science to my method, but I find that's what works best for me. Next, I cut a black hill to add to my panel. I used an edge die that I have in my own collection, but you could definitely use just a pair of scissors to cut your own hill and your own shape. Now, let's turn our cute monster into a mummy for Halloween. I simply cut a few strips of white cardstock about 1/3 of an inch wide and started laying them over his face and attaching them with some tape runner on the back. Once I was satisfied with the coverage, I used my scissors to cut some of the excess off his head, and then I placed the piece back into the monster body die and ran it through my machine one more time, giving the head a perfectly fitted shape to fit back into the body. Now it's time to put the card together. I attached the hill to the bottom of the panel with some tape runner and made sure the piece covered any remaining white space. I also made sure it lined up on both sides and across the bottom. That ensures that when we add the panel to the card base, it fits perfectly. Next, I used the green alpha bean stickers to spell the word boo across the top of the panel. I made sure that my letters were centered, straight, and even across the bottom before I pressed them down to adhere. The contrast between the letters and the sky really make it stand out. I double-checked the placement of my monster on the card before I rubbed the hill with my anti-static tool, and then I stamped and embossed in white the Monster Hug sentiment at the bottom of the hill. A quick tip when you're removing stray embossing powder before heat setting. Use a tiny paintbrush to remove stray powder, but rather than swiping it over the tiny areas, just use the tip of it to pick up the teeny tiny strays. The last step was attaching the face to the monster's body. I used some 3L 3D foam circles. The video shows me using foam tape, but I wanted a bit more lift, so I swapped the tape out with the dots. This turned out so cute and a fun way to use the monster for a Halloween card. You could do so many other fun projects for Halloween with the mummy monster. You could add it to treat bags or to a banner or even add a magnet to the back for the fridge. Thanks so much for stopping by and crafting with me today. Have a fabulous day and we'll see you next time.